And that's really when things started to heat up for me. As I mentioned, I was getting death threats all the time. I was getting rape threats and threats of violence from people that I personally knew. And my address to my one-bedroom apartment in college was doxed online.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Not Your Average Gun Girls. Emily, this doesn't look like our studio.
No, it doesn't. It's a little different.
What? Where are we?
We are still in Dallas.
We are still in Dallas.
We're still in Dallas. But we are at the Young Women's Leadership Summit.
Yes.
Turning Point USA's YWLS, one of our favorite events to go to every year that we've been going to for, I want to say the very beginning. Like when it was at the hotel at the DFW airport.
Oh my gosh, and we were in the hallway. I remember I had like a semi booth. I don't know if you were there.
I've been going since 2017, so I've been going for a while.
Was Antonia?
Yep. Dang, that was a long time ago.
I mean, Alexo, there's like right when we were starting, and there was a mannequin and like a, I think we printed off a Kinko's foam board or something.
That.
But there was no exhibit hall. There was none of this. There was no media row. There was none of this. So we've been doing this for a long time, and it is one of our absolute favorite events to come to. And we are with one of our absolute favorite Turning Point contributors. We are with Isabel Brown. How are you?
So excited to finally be on the podcast. I know our schedules have been crazy.
We've been trying to do it, I think, for a long time.
Well, we wanted to have you like physically there.
Yeah.
It's always better.
We could have zoomed you in.
But we love it in person. It's so much better.
Yeah, but I'm so excited.
We were trying to get together in DC back when we both were living in DC.
That was a hot minute ago too.
Yes, it was.
But you two are some of my favorite people to work with in the influencer space. You're so genuine, so authentic, and that's true of so many people at Young Women's Leadership Summit every year. So this is always my favorite event we do every single calendar year, and it's just great to be back with everybody that we love.
What do you get most excited about coming here every year?
For me, it's really like a passage of time milestone. My very first ever political conference exposure to the conservative movement was YWLS in 2017. And I was on campus at my college at that time being completely ridiculed for being an outspoken conservative in biomedical sciences and student government, which were really my two big involvement pieces on my college campus. I was that conservative girl, that white power Barbie girl on my campus in Colorado. And I actually got a targeted Facebook ad for this event in 2017. Had no idea who Turning Point USA was, had certainly no idea who Charlie Kirk was. I actually had to Google him when he went on stage to open up the entire event. I was completely clueless. But from minute one, I totally fell in love with this organization, with what we were telling young women in terms of actually empowering them to take their American dream into their own hands and run with it, and just the conservative movement in general. So I totally pivoted my life plan after that event and have had a totally different life since.
That's back when Facebook wasn't censoring as much as they were, especially if you were able to get a targeted Turning Point ad.
I wonder if you would still get that same targeted Turning Point
I
ad.
have absolutely no idea, but it has been just so cool to see how things have grown in the last few years. And I certainly never, ever anticipated I would be sitting here working in media and being a spokesperson or contributor or public speaking or any of that.
When did you start, I guess, really getting into that side of, I guess, yourself in terms of like looking into being a conservative or just trying to start kind of talking about it more? Because were you always, like, did you come from a political background in terms of like, were these are conversations you were having with your family at the dinner table?
They totally were. And I loved that about my upbringing. I like to say that my career path was never going to be in politics. My dream was to be a trauma surgeon because I love science. I love the human body. I love anatomy. Wild. And I really wanted to help people based on that love as best as I possibly could. So my degree is actually in biomedical sciences from Colorado State University. And then I ended up getting my master's degree in biomedical sciences policy and advocacy, very long name, from Georgetown University when we were still living in DC. And so I love science because I love the pursuit of objective truth. And that's really what I wanted to study and embrace in my career. But I was always raised in a very politically active household. My parents are Catholic lawyers. So as you can imagine, we spent a lot of time talking about politics and religion at the dinner table. We were always forced to watch the State of the Union as kids and understand what was happening in government. Our parents would quiz us afterwards. And when I was in high school, my mom actually forced me to join the competitive speech and debate team, which at the time I said, Mom, That is literally social suicide. Those are the weird kids that have no friends and carry rolly backpacks to school, and they go to these weird random high school cafeterias in suits every single weekend. I already have no friends. That would be the literal death sentence of my high school experience. And she said, it's just gonna set you up so well for your future. I'm going to make you go for 1 month. And if you still hate it after 1 month, you don't have to do it anymore. And I said, oh my gosh, fine. So I show up, and for the first 2 weeks, totally dragged my feet into every single competition. I hated it. I was not about it. And then on the third week, I kind of realized if I took the time to actually try at this, I could probably be pretty good. And for the next 3 years, I was the captain of the speech and debate team. Oh my gosh,
that's amazing.
I went to the national competition representing Colorado several times and totally fell in love with that pursuit of objective truth, what I wanted to end up utilizing in college with the study of science. And taking the time to do the research to understand the 360-degree perspective on every single issue, because the event that I was doing, Student Congress, required that I wouldn't know what side of an issue I would take until I was in the moment. Basically, whenever you had an opportunity to advocate, you always would, whether you agreed with that personally or not. And so learning how not only to defend your positions that you personally had, but also those that you vehemently disagreed with was the best training I could have possibly gotten to work in politics.
I feel like that's a life skill everyone needs.
I know. I was like, can we like go and take these classes now? Because I feel, I mean, thank goodness your mom had the foresight. She had no idea this is what you were going to be doing, but wow, did she set you up? Because now you're hosting your own show called Outdated, and you do just that. Like, I always love watching your shows because the way that you come at arguments is so good, and I just love how you break things down. So like, who would have known that you were training for that way back in the day?
I guess is the only answer.
God kind of had a plan for you.
He totally did the whole time. And really in college was when I made the big switch to start walking towards this for a career path. I knew it was too late to change my major, and I loved what I was studying anyway by the end of junior year or so. And in between junior and senior year, I actually worked at the White House for President Trump as an intern. So really got involved in the political movement that way. So decided to continue pursuing science academically, but from a career perspective, started building a bit of a following on social media after college graduation, was doing as many local media interviews and hits as I could in Colorado to defend what we were doing to bring a conservative voice to Colorado State University, and got an opportunity with PragerU after graduation, and then Turning Point USA, and here we are 3 years later, almost to the day. So it's been really cool.
That's a busy, fast-tracked 3 years. I feel like that little bit that you said is like somebody who's lived like that could be their entire career. And you're like, this. And
they would be happy with that amazing career. But remind me, were you involved with Campus Carry initiatives on your campus?
I think that started right after I had graduated. I was very fortunate in the state of Colorado to have campus carry laws that protected our ability to carry firearms on my college campus. And you guys can read all about this in my book, Frontlines, but I was extremely targeted on my campus to the point that I was receiving death threats almost every single day from students I went to class with, from random adults in the community.
What was that coming from?
Because I had started a Turning Point USA chapter in my community, and we were bringing speakers like Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, and Dennis Prager to my campus, which all of a sudden became a security threat and risk for a public school that's largely agriculturally based in northern Colorado. Antifa was really just coming onto the scene as a really big player in the political movement. So people were driving from every single Western state to come to Colorado and to cause absolute mayhem at our events. We actually had to have the National Guard come to our event with Charlie, and we had snipers on top of our computer science building so that people wouldn't drive cars through the massive crowds of people protesting Charlie's presence on campus. So that was absolutely crazy. That was the spring, February time of 2018. And that's really when things started to heat up for me. As I mentioned, I was getting death threats all the time. I was getting rape threats and threats of violence from people that I personally knew. And my address to my one-bedroom apartment in college was doxed online.
So they were like, how are you receiving these threats?
Social media, mostly through like Facebook Messenger or whatever. I didn't even know my address had been doxed online until a friend of mine took a screenshot of it, and it was in a Facebook comment on an interview I had given to our local newspaper about one of our events, and obviously we got that taken down, and that was great. I made a lot of great friends at the CSU Police Department there in Fort Collins, Colorado, but I was only 20 years old at the time. I wasn't yet 21, and it was so frustrating knowing that I would have to have a late night at the library, or I would have to walk back from a late exam one night and walk right across the street, right across campus to my apartment. But no, I might not even be safe in my own apartment. How scary is that? So the minute I turned 21, I purchased a handgun. I got my concealed carry permit in the state of Colorado. And I was very fortunate to live in a state that did protect my right to carry on campus, because my entire senior year at that point, I could protect myself if I was in a bad situation. But that is not the norm. And it's very surprising that a state like Colorado that has such extreme gun control laws did protect that, because my friends right up the road at the University of Wyoming didn't have that right.
Yeah, so in Texas, like that wasn't a thing in Texas either. And people think Texas is so pro-gun. Right. And I'm like, I mean, we are like more than DC or more than like California, but I mean, like there's still, it's not just like a free for all, you know, Wild Wild West, everyone go have a gun and carry it on. I mean, they can now with constitutional carry, but you know, but I mean, that's so true. And I'm glad that you say that, because I think you called me when you got your gun and your license, and I was like, I'm so excited for you, because I saw your trajectory within like just the influential space with all this. And I was like, this is so needed. We need more young women like yourself actually like taking a hold of their Second Amendment, and not just saying, I believe in the Second Amendment.
Right.
I support it, but actually doing it, like literally exercising,
living it out,
you know. And I'm so thankful for what you do, because you are such a voice of reason, and I think so many young women look up to you. And so, you know, I'm just really thankful for what you've been doing for such a long time.
Thank you. You know, it's been an interesting journey within the Second Amendment conversation for me in particular. I occasionally will post about being really pro-gun or really 2A, but that's not necessarily my brand as a creator. I'm much more of a Gen Z cultural lifestyle influencer. And so I think it's interesting when I do post about that, the conversations that come out of that, mostly people are just curious because they themselves maybe weren't exposed to guns in their house when they were growing up.
What are they asking you?
They have no idea what that actually means. I like to respond, me neither. Like I literally had no exposure to that. My dad had a few hunting rifles and shotguns in a safe in our like storage room in the basement when I was growing up, but I never went hunting with him, and I didn't know how to shoot a gun. And when I went to college, I had so many friends in ROTC, and they were just shocked that I didn't even know how to shoot a gun. I didn't know how to pick it up. And they said, fine, we'll teach you. So occasionally we would go out to the gun range and we would shoot everything from handguns to their military grade weapons and everything in between. And it was so fun to learn that, because the moment I pulled the trigger on my very first gun I ever shot, which was a 22, I mean, there's like no kickback ever. I'm like, oh, this really isn't that scary. It's actually kind of fun. And I was so nervous as I was pulling back on the trigger the first time that I had no idea what to expect. And I think having that illusion shattered for me was really what got me excited about shooting for fun, about potentially exercising my Second Amendment right to protect myself eventually when I did decide to get my concealed carry permit. And so I always like to encourage young adults who are curious about this and they're questioning it, just go try it. Go figure it out.
What kind of questions? I mean, because you said predominantly your audience is Gen Z, right? So walk us through the mindset of a Gen Zer in relation to firearms, because we know what they're seeing on the media. We know what they're hearing, but like, you're on the front lines with it. So what are you hearing from them right now?
You know, the general attitude of Gen Z politically right now is interesting, because it's very 50-50, extreme involvement, advocacy. We're not waiting for permission to do what we want to do and advocate for the causes we want to advocate for. And then the other 50% of the time is extreme apathy. And I think with the Second Amendment, we're on the apathetic side with Gen Z, because largely our only exposure to firearms, especially with the conversation we're having in the media, has been related to the tragedies we've experienced throughout our entire childhood and now coming into adulthood. When you think about Gen Z's timeline of existence, I think people have a hard time wrapping their head around what that's looked like, as it's been marked by milestones of tragedy in America and marred by extreme conflict. When we think young people, we think millennials, but for Gen Z, reality has been much different. Most Gen Zers were toddlers, babies, or not even born during 9/11. I was 3 years old when 9/11 happened. My youngest sister wasn't even born yet. She was born in 2002. So that really kicked off our entire childhood. Then we experienced school shootings and extreme violent crime all across our country all the time throughout our childhood. We experienced war to a degree that I don't think we had really ever seen in terms of proxy wars and confusion of who are we fighting. We're fighting non-state actors. And so guns really became a symbol of war for us and tragedy within our own backyard, in our schools, in our grocery stores, in our movie theaters. I'm from Colorado. I will distinctly forever remember the Aurora Theater shooting. I was at summer camp that night, and my friend had gone to that movie theater to watch the Batman premiere, and we didn't know what theater he was in. Thank God he was in a different room. But I will never forget that feeling of like, this is a really bad thing. This is so scary. This is taking away the life of my friends. Fast forward to as we're coming into adulthood, and we saw the COVID-19 response where it literally shut down our entire concept of reality. We became apathetic to almost everything overnight because we were so isolated from one another. And again, guns became a symbol of tragedy and conflict. As we saw the riots in the summer of 2020, we've seen massive spikes in homicide and violent crime, and of course, massive spikes in suicide as well. And the mental health crisis that we're experiencing as a generation is unlike anything our world has ever seen. So I think when it comes to Gen Z, people have a strong feeling about guns. They just have no idea how to approach that. And largely it's a negative attitude because that's the only exposure we've ever been given.
Well,
So
where are they supposed to get it from?
Yeah,
exactly.
And
Nowhere.
what are you doing? I mean, like, what is when you do post something about I have my concealed carry or something that's pro 2A in light of especially even like the recent tragedies that we've all experienced. I think those of us in the 2A community have a lot of work to do in how we approach it, how we talk about these things, but also still continuing to stand our ground and speak up for this right that we are just, you know, one other mass shooting away from losing our rights. And
maybe not even. I mean, that conversation is literally happening as we
of
speak
course. Well,
right now.
Of course it is. And so, like, what do you do? Where do you direct people, and what do you say to them? What are the questions that they're even asking you?
You know, I have a really interesting vantage point on this because I kind of have one foot in and one foot out of the 2A community. And so I see the misperception people have, but I also see where we're maybe failing to communicate properly to people who have no exposure to guns whatsoever, and where they maybe could be pulled in as people who can really be an advocate and a strong voice for this issue. The biggest question that I get from people is, how can you possibly support guns if you say that you're pro-life, or if you say you want to protect people, or you say that you care? And I think that's been the narrative so significantly drilled into the head of Gen Z, that guns equal murder, guns equal mass shooting, guns equal war, guns equal tragedy. That's going to take away my life
from it.
or somebody else's life. Nothing good happens with a gun. That is totally a line that we have heard through TV, through music, through our parents, through everybody. And the reality is, guns are just a tool. It's the same thing as anything else. It's the same argument I make with social media.
Right.
Often within the conservative movement, people say, oh, social media is so evil. TikTok is so evil. No, it's just a tool that you can use to accomplish a certain thing. And the social media argument to spread information and to get the truth out there. With the gun side of things, it's a tool that you can either use for extreme evil or for extreme good. And how we train people and equip them and help them responsibly understand that is how we go in one direction or another.
Do you find that, like, they're receptive? Because I think about this sometimes. I'm like, you know, I like to have conversations based on facts.
Yeah.
But facts don't always change, especially like Gen Zers. I feel like they're very emotional, and they make very emotional decisions. They're not looking at objective truth, because how
objective
God's name
truth
do they even
doesn't
know what
exist.
truth is anymore?
You're right. That's the difference. And this is what I like to say to people when I give speeches to like Republican Party fundraisers or state conventions, older audiences that are more my parents' and grandparents' age. We have to throw out the playbook on every single issue, but especially this one for Generation Z, because reality, like life, everything happening around us is upside down from everything you've ever experienced. Even with millennials, where everybody thinks, young people just scream at the sky and they're blue-haired and they're so reactive and it's the participation trophy generation. Yes, that's true, but Gen Z is nothing like millennials even. Like, we have to throw out everything we thought we knew about communicating objective truth to this generation, because objective truth does not exist in 2022 America
So
for
you
Generation
can throw out
Z.
facts. You can
Facts
throw out,
do
they
not
don't care.
hit. It's like talking to a brick wall.
So
with
what
this
do you do?
generation.
How are you
supposed to
changing
get through?
hearts?
You change hearts. And I think that's a great way to phrase that question, is it's a heart problem more than it's a head problem we're experiencing with this next generation. I think the conservative movement as a whole, and especially the 2A community, has to make a switch in our messaging from the facts don't care about your feelings perspective, which has worked. It was very successful with millennials, to, if you really care, this is the side that you should take. If you really care about protecting people's lives, and if you really care about keeping kids safe at school, if you really want to go to the movie theaters or the grocery store and be safe and take care of your family and not have to rely on someone else to do that, if you really hate the police, which is a great argument to talk about with people, let's bring that back home to one another and put that responsibility back in our own hands and give you the tools to properly equip you to do that.
That's a very
interesting
perspective. But I also think, too, now after hearing you verbalize that coming from the caring kind of perspective was basically kind of what was done during COVID. Like, don't you care about people's lives?
Yep. And it's
like,
very effective.
Don't you care? You're hurting people. You're killing people.
That was used for bad during COVID.
Right.
But we saw how effective that was. And I think it's because Gen Z is really shell-shocked. They're shell-shocked by everything that they've experienced throughout their entire childhood and now coming into adulthood. Our entire concept of reality has been flipped upside down. We can't define what our gender is, let alone be able to have serious conversations about these issues that are logical and based in factual reality. So if we can successfully reach someone by saying, if you care about protecting kids, if you care about keeping yourself safe, if you care about ending rape culture, if you care about all of these things, which Gen Z has so much of, we really do have a humanity-centered, heart-centered generational identity. That's how we can successfully change people's minds on this issue, by starting with the heart and then moving to the facts in your mind.
This is so interesting and so incredibly helpful for me, even personally, because I'm like, I want to connect with Gen Zers or whatever we're calling them. You
the
know,
Zoomers were
also,
very fun.
Can we just like go ahead and say, like, how old are Gen Zers?
Yes.
Like, what are we looking
Important
at right
definition. I have to redefine this all the time because it's very confusing. Most people agree Gen Z starts the year that I was born, which is 1997. So Gen Z right now, you're not old. Don't give me that face. Don't give me that face. So I'm 25. I just turned 25 on Friday. It goes basically between 12 and 25 is Generation Z right now. We are all kind of coming into
25.
adulthood.
12 and 25 age.
That's the age range.
So what were the years?
1997, and I can't do
Okay,
math.
that's
So
fine.
down.
Backwards
All right,
math
so,
for
19,
yeah.
so basically 1997.
Or
okay.
below. Interestingly, the next generation, we're starting over the alphabet. It's Generation Alpha, which are the children of
know.
millennials. Please, for the love of God, pray for these children because it's going to be an interesting experience. But Gen Z is about to become the largest voter demographic in America we've ever seen, the most powerful demographic we've ever seen, the people with the most access to the most information at any specific time in human history, and arguably the most educated generation the world has ever seen. And so we have a really unique opportunity to equip this group of people with the right information to lead our country and to lead our world, but we're not sure how to get there. And I have a lot of fun content and more coming about that soon that I can't really tell you much about.
Can't wait for that.
But it's fascinating because what every young generation does in America is they rebel against the generation that came before them. Everybody wants to be punk rock. Everybody wants to swing for the fences and stick it to the man and be different. And for millennials, that looked like becoming extreme democratic socialists.
Yeah, can we get back
anarchy.
to washing our hair and wearing makeup again
That's
and working
what it was.
out? Like,
we are. We are
Thank
getting
God.
back to that because
That's taken a long time, I feel
if
like.
you think about the rebelling against the previous generation, for so long we've just lumped in Gen Z and millennial as the youth.
They're just all kind of
I just
conglomerated.
assumed they were the same, not the same, but just they were younger.
Yeah, everybody's just the youth.
Well, but I'm a
Gen
millennial,
Z,
but like I'm definitely not a Gen Zer.
Gen Z is rebelling against the millennial identity. So we're rebelling against this idea that it has to be the collective, that we have to fall into democratic socialism and anarchy, and that we need the government to succeed. Gen Z is largely entrepreneurial, very liberty-minded. If you go on an issue-by-issue basis, forget about political parties for a second because we don't know how to define those either, just like our gender. On an issue-by-issue basis, Gen Z is the most conservative generation America has seen since World War II. So if we can figure out how to communicate with them, we have a winning issue every single time.
So can I ask you this? Like, if they're the most conservative group, are you still telling me that those same people who would, I guess, align conservatively are still, like, unaware of or have, like, a misconception about firearms?
Yes. We have a misconception about everything.
That is extremely interesting to me because you usually associate pro-2A with conservative, even though we know like the Second Amendment is for everybody, and we know that Democrats own guns, like independents own guns.
But where is that being? Not taught, but where is that being exposed? Because I feel like when you talk about, the conservative Gen Zers and how they're the largest set of conservative group here, I feel like that's all very specific to political, taking out the Second Amendment, like not talking about guns. It's all on the political aspect of it. So where are you having the conversation about the Second Amendment, about guns? Because I think, I want to, and this is nothing against Turning Point at all. Everyone needs to, make changes. But I feel like back in the beginning of some of the Turning Point events, someone would come on stage and talk about our Second Amendment rights. And of course, everyone would cheer because it's part of being conservative. It's part of being, for America. But I don't think back then that many people, like we've talked about, really understand what that means.
No, they don't. The interesting thing about Generation Z, and this is the big ugly secret that for whatever reason, the conservative movement, conservative Inc. with a capital C, cannot figure out, we are not a political generation. Period. And we've been trying to have political conversations with a generation that is completely apathetic to politics.
As in like voting? You mean when you say apathetic to
No.
politics, like voting or getting involved in political advocacy?
Yes. So my
Okay.
dad and I had a really interesting conversation about this the other day because I was curious what his perspective was now watching all three of his Gen Z daughters come into adulthood and start to graduate from college and enter the workforce and go to our next venture. And he said what's really interesting about the 2020s is that it's oddly reminiscent of the 1970s. Where literally every single thing in American society was political. What you wore was political. Where you went to college was political. What underwear brand you bought was political, which now it is again, by the way, with Calvin Klein putting all this stuff out.
I just saw a tampon.
Tampons are political.
Group has an exhibitor, like has an exhibition. I was
They're
like,
a great company here, by the way, at
they actually
YWLS.
sound
They're
awesome. And I love that the causes that they support, but I was like, are
Tampon
we
companies
really
are saying men have
politicizing?
periods,
Yeah.
which is
Right,
political.
right.
Everything down to every product you buy in America today is making a political stance. What artists you listen to,
Yeah.
what TV shows you watch, what car you
Yeah.
drive, whether you drive a car, all of those things are somehow making a political statement in one way or another. And we're canceling everyone
Yeah, that's
because
an
of
interesting
that.
parallel.
For that reason, Gen Z is trying to rebel against that and say, we want nothing to be about politics anymore. We're a little sick and tired of all of this. We just want to be left alone and live our lives. And so my dad had a prediction that he thinks the next few years, probably faster than a decade, are going to look a lot more like the 80s and 90s where nothing was about politics and people didn't talk about politics anymore. You just lived your life and watched the
You had
movies you
fun.
liked watching and you had fun
Yeah.
and you didn't talk about politics with your neighbors all the time. And I hope and pray that is true. And that's exactly what I'm seeing with Generation Z. We have to stop approaching these conversations as political issues. And this isn't just isolated to the Second Amendment conversation or why you should be exposed to firearms. We're talking about abortion. We're talking about gender ideology. We're talking about education. Every aspect of the American cultural experience has to be a cultural issue, not a political issue. And I think that's how the Second Amendment could become a winning issue for this
I want to know how to
generation.
talk to, like, I want to know what do we say? Because, like, I mean, I want to make a difference. I want to actually connect with, like, help us help you, Isabel. Like,
Help us help
when it
you.
comes to firearms, because I have no doubt that I completely understand the framework of which they're approaching the firearm itself. Like, I get it, I understand it, but I have a hard time, like, not wanting to go like like here's the fact, like, so what can I say?
I think the easiest way to connect with this generation is to find common ground with them, first and foremost. And that's true on any political issue, regardless of whether or not it's related to the Second Amendment or not. When you create some sort of emotional intimacy with a Gen Zer, be it through social media content, which I would argue is the most successful way to do this, in-person conversations, speaking events that we do on college campuses or on high school campuses, and then you take it from there, that sense of intimacy really bonds you to that conversation. Whereas the way we've approached it with previous generations, particularly millennials, is, haha, we're owning the libs. Here's a fact. Here's a viral moment on TikTok or Twitter. And that's good. Well, TikTok wasn't even a millennial thing. On Twitter. And we're going to blow this up and that's funny. And now we're viral and everybody has suddenly changed their mind. That does not work for this next generation. It is long conversations. It's patience. It's respect. And it's experiencing that emotional connection with someone that I think we've been lacking from a political perspective for several years now, which is why we have to move towards a more cultural issue. So, great example. If you're talking about how firearms can be used to protect women against potential issues with sexual assault or rape, the way that we used to approach that with millennials is, well, here's the fact, this percent of women carrying a gun are less likely to be sexually assaulted while they're running or whatever from Alexo. This percent of women who don't have guns are more likely to be sexually assaulted by somebody. There's the facts. You can make up your mind for yourself. I think the way you approach that with this new generation is saying, you know someone who has been sexually assaulted, or maybe you yourself have been sexually assaulted and you've seen the impact that that has made on someone's life. We say we live in a rape culture. We say we live in a sexual assault culture that doesn't care about women. We're living through the middle of Me Too, which is now Men Too, I guess.
Too.
After
I saw that
Johnny
after Johnny
Depp had a great
I did not see
victory.
that.
Yeah,
Is that what
that's the new
calling
phrase.
it
It's
now?
really like-
Yeah.
But we're living through this era because women are finally feeling empowered to speak up about this. And there are obviously positives and negatives associated with that movement. We could spend 8 hours talking about that. If you've directly experienced that, you know why it has never been more important to protect women with every tool in our arsenal to do that. Here's how firearms can help you do that. See how the approach is just so much different
It's so
from being
different.
like the talking political head, statistic. People get so overwhelmed by that, but when you can slow it down and not yell and not be statistical.
Much more relatable, and I think sometimes the statistics, depending on who you're talking to, just kind of just like,
yeah, we don't care. We
No,
just literally don't care.
Well, and so our Gen Zers, as what's the right word? I remember when I talked to a group of sorority girls about options, and I'm talking tasers, mace, and firearms. They pushed back so much because they didn't want to accept the reality that bad things happen to people. Is that the mindset with Gen Z too? Or can you actually have the conversation to say, look, this is the reality? I mean, you guys are seeing this on the news. I mean,
I think it's even more so than seeing it on the news. Like, you're living through it. Statistically, for lack of a better term, your friends are experiencing these things. You've probably known someone who's been involved in an active shooter situation. Like, you know, bad things happen to good people. You experience it every single day. And so when you have that connection to that reality, I think it's so much easier to level with people and say, if these things are happening, why wouldn't we take the extra step to protect these people? The most impactful conversations I've seen this week related to the Second Amendment after the shooting here in Texas, which was horrible and completely heart-wrenching, have been, okay, we know this happens. This is normal in American society now. How sad is that? It shouldn't be normal, but it is. This is happening a lot. Ever since Columbine, this has been a very, very regular occurrence. Most people my age have been involved in some sort of school lockdown. I have. Like, everybody has. That's been normal. So if that's the case, why are we protecting our politicians that are screaming at us about this? Why are we protecting our banks and our athletes and our favorite celebrities and BLM mansions and all these things that we say we care about, but we're not giving the same protection to kids? That doesn't make sense.
That's like a good, actual, practical conversation to be having with people. And that's why I get so, like, frustrated after the shooting that happened, when, you know, it instantly becomes politicized without ever addressing practical things first and practical steps. And I'm like, this
because it's always going to the tool, and it's always been that way with the gun. It's like the gun did it. It's the gun's fault.
The gun's
everything.
fault. Get rid of guns, even though a gun was used to actually, at the end, stop the guy.
Exactly.
Correct. And I think this was a great opportunity for us to point towards the horrible situation that this happened and look at the person who committed this crime and say, this person was really broken. This is a broken human being who very clearly doesn't understand their perception of reality. They can't define their gender identity. They don't know what is really going on around them. And if we can point to that and say, we have a problem like this en masse, like we have the most anxiety, the most depression, the most substance abuse, the most suicide attempts ever in American history with this next generation, Generation Z. We are a broken generation. Why? And if we start asking those questions and we start getting to the root of it, it's easy to see how these things manifest in horrible situations like mass shootings,
you're talking
like
about
increased homicide rates.
a long time to turn this ship around and to actually, and also, how do you legislate? How do you start to undo legislation that has kind of gotten us to where we are? And in the meantime, like, let's start doing practical things to start securing our schools and making our schools safer.
Great question.
You know, so I mean,
it's a question that people don't want to, I feel like, look at, because it's just so easy to blame the gun.
Sure. That's a lot easier than fixing society and cultural and
because
going
that
after
also starts
hearts.
with, oh, I'm sorry, you want me to actually have a sit-down dinner with my family?
Yeah.
Like, is anyone doing that anymore? The
No.
nuclear family is being dismantled. So, of course, like, just asking how your child is doing, that's too easy.
Yeah.
You know?
And I also think we make the mistake. The left loves to just blame the gun, blame the gun, blame the gun. Let's get rid of them. All of them. They are all bad. They are all evil. That's a mistake. It's also a mistake for conservatives to be like, how do we legislatively protect our right? That's important, yes, but that's not the entire crux of the argument. And I think it's interesting because in the conservative movement, we always like to say politics is downstream from culture, but we're not living that out. We are living the opposite of that right now, where we're going about something politically and trying to solve something politically and expecting culture is going to catch up later on down the line.
Well, this has all been super helpful. Not really where I thought this conversation was going to go, but I appreciate it because it is so big in our country right now. And I think we're all asking these questions. We're all trying to figure out what we can do, how we can be better, how we can solve a problem that is like so multifaceted. There is not one stop shop solution to figuring this out.
And
so,
I do want to say before we end the episode too, people have a really misguided perception of what most people calling for gun control are actually advocating for. We think of the Bernie Sanders and the Kamala Harrises and the Joe Bidens, and we're like, that is evil. You're trying to take away our right to protect ourselves. Yes, that's true. But the vast majority of people who are not elected officials on the left, and they're not talking heads, and they don't have 1 million followers on Instagram, those people really just want to protect people. And they are so misguided and they're so confused. And all they've ever been told is the only way to accomplish that is to take away the tool, to take away the means to do that. If we can break down the very extreme political polarization we're experiencing and have real, honest conversations with people, I think we would be amazed to see the common ground that we have and the direction that we can be moving forward in as a country. Because I can tell you what, in the aftermath of the shooting in Texas last week, almost every single post I saw on social media was the exact same post. The last sentence was different. The last sentence was either, we have to take away guns, it's time for gun control now, or they're going to use this as an opportunity to take away guns, But the whole first part of every single post was exactly the same sentiment. And so I think if we can just get over the fact that like people who disagree with you maybe don't even know where they're coming from.
Right.
They don't know why they believe what they do. It's maybe just the only thing they've ever been told, especially for young people who this is the narrative, the only narrative we've ever been exposed to. That's when we can actually find common ground and move forward for this issue.
That's great. Well, you never know what you're going to get here on Not Your Average Gun Girls. We roll with the punches and you know what? We just have such interesting guests that come on our show, and this is why we love this place, because you never know what we're going to get. And this was extremely helpful. I hope you guys have found this really helpful to let everyone know where they can find you and your show if they want to continue having these type of conversations and hearing what you have to say.
So as Amy mentioned, I host a show on a much different topic with dating and relationships called Outdated. It comes out every Tuesday, and you can listen on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or watch on YouTube. And you can find me all across social media platforms at the Isabel Brown.
Awesome. Thanks, Isabel, so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for coming on. And,
thanks for having me.
We're going to have more episodes.
Yep.
More stuff coming from Young Women's Leadership Summit, so stay tuned.
Not Your Average Gun Girl Show and its related companies, Alexo, Athletica, LLC, and Stami Tactical, LLC, shares information that may potentially have legal implications for its listeners. A reminder that laws vary for each state, and we encourage listeners to seek local legal advice to understand applicable laws. Any items, services, products, and advice mentioned during the Not Your Average Gun Girl Show should be used at your own discretion in accordance with your local and state laws, and you should follow applicable manufacturer's instructions. Not Your Average Gun Girls, Alexo, Athletica, LLC, and Stami Tactical, LLC cannot be held liable for your actions based on the information shared.